Hello, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown for May 25th, 2022. And if you're worried out there, don't panic because it's National Towel Day. I am your tap dancing co-host, Tom Hollingsworth, and joining me as always, and I say that because it's been a couple weeks since it's been always, is my partner in crime, Mr. Stephen Foskett. Stephen, welcome back to the show.
It's good to be back here. I'm glad to be part of this fabulous production, and I know where my towel is. Do you?
I do, in fact. It's over there safe in case anyone wants to build a hyperspace expressway lane through my front yard. So pour yourself a nice glass of lunchtime wine because it is National Wine Day, and let's jump into some news stories that came up this week. The first one we actually covered on the rundown back in April on the 13th, but it's kind of finalized now. That would be NetApp closing their acquisition of Instaclustr this week. Now, as we kind of mentioned in the past, this is a bit of a big move for NetApp because they're trying to leverage some of their new cloud expertise and offer Instaclustr as kind of a database as a service solution. But more importantly, they're trying to bring together DevOps, FinOps, and SecOps teams into a unified cloud environment to kind of accelerate cloud workload migrations. And yeah, that sounds a little bit weird to me because we're talking about a stuffy old storage company talking about all this exciting new cloud stuff, right? But Stephen, you're the storage guru around here. Is this a major shift in strategy for NetApp, or is this kind of, to coin a phrase from Wayne Gretzky, skating to where the money is?
Yeah, Tom, I'm actually going to take my storage hat off and just throw it over there in the corner and instead put on my cloud hat for this one, because that's really what this is all about. It's important to understand that NetApp had a bit of a reorganization last year, and one of the NetApp executives, Anthony Lai, remained in charge of sort of a nebulous part of the company, cloud, but not that cloud, and not this other cloud, and not this cloud product, and not that cloud product. So there was a lot of like head scratching, like, wait, what exactly is Lai doing there? Well, here's what Lai is doing there. He's building a fully autonomous cloud sidecar onto the side of the NetApp storage company. And this cloud sidecar is not bound by history. And that, I think, is incredibly important. And that really helps explain what is going on here with acquisitions like Spot, like Cloud Checker, like Data Mechanics and Filament, and now Instaclustr. What Anthony Lai is doing is essentially building a cloud conglomerate, basically cloud ops, DevOps, FinOps, SecOps, like you said, building a conglomerate on the side of NetApp, except instead of having him do it as part of some sort of independent company funded by venture capital, he's doing it as part of this public and honestly pretty successful storage company. And what this means, and this is actually pretty clever, I'm going to give NetApp's management a little credibility here, a little nod. It allows the company to do the mythical changing the wheels while the car is in motion, or whatever they say. Essentially, Anthony Lai is building an independent business here that focuses not on ONTAP, which is NetApp's traditional storage platform, but on all new technology, centering, it seems to me, around Spot, but really centering around cloud operations and not bound by the history of the company. This is an interesting take because, frankly, most companies have found this to be the single greatest challenge. It's always hard to basically move away from an old business and into a new business, and very few companies have succeeded in doing that. Apple, for example, recently stopped selling iPods because every iPhone has eliminated the need for that product. But that took some major will on the part of Apple's management to give up a cash cow business like the iPod. And it takes a company like that to do this, and frankly, that's what NetApp is trying to figure out a way around. They can't just stop selling ONTAP and storage arrays, but they know they have to change the company. Anthony Lai is changing the company, and that's what's going on here, and that's what Instaclustr is all about. And yes, it's an interesting product with interesting people in an interesting space, but really what this is NetApp evolving for the future. And for that, I'm going to tip the cloud hat and ignore the storage hat in the corner. Tom, no matter how you slice it, Cisco's previous quarter wasn't great. The company reported revenue of $12.8 billion, which is down from their projection of $13.8 billion. That's bad enough. But Cisco actually lowered the forecast for the remainder of the year to 5.5% growth instead of 6% growth. CEO Chuck Robbins attributed these wild numbers to a complex path in front of the company, which includes significant issues with the ongoing chip shortage and, frankly, some customer headwinds. Tom, what's going on here? Is Cisco feeling the effects of the global supply chain, or is this something more?
So they are definitely feeling the effects of the global supply chain. We can't deny that, but it actually is a little bit more. It turns out that there was a really interesting thing that happened at the end of Cisco's last quarter. They really wanted people to buy stuff, like a lot. Please book your revenue, and anyone who's ever bought from any kind of vendor or somebody who kind of works on that model, you know that, boy, that last week of the quarter, it's wheeling and dealing time. We're going to do whatever it takes to get these things shipped out the door so that we can worry about that. Well, rewind 3 more months beyond that, and you're kind of looking at, say, around the first of the year, because remember that Cisco's fiscal quarters don't match up with the calendar year. So their end of their previous quarter ended at the first of the calendar year or thereabouts. They were really, really trying to get product shipped out the door in that quarter, because at the beginning of calendar year 2022, all their component prices were going to go up because they were going to start building in inflation and a bunch of other stuff, right? So Cisco sold a whole bunch of equipment. Now what? Well, we look to exercise giant Peloton for the answer to this question. So remember how Peloton was making money hand over flywheel at the beginning of the pandemic, because now that everybody's cooped up in their apartment or their house and they have to deal with their family, they need to exercise. And so everybody went out and bought a Peloton bike, Peloton treadmill, I don't know, Peloton pull-up bar, or whatever it was they sold. And everyone's like, man, Peloton's crushing it. They're gonna take over the industry. And then the pandemic stopped, and all of a sudden Peloton's broke. So the question was, did Peloton sell a whole bunch more equipment because everybody wanted to exercise and they've expanded the market? Or did Peloton pull their customers forward, and these were people that were going to buy a Peloton anyway, and they just bought it earlier than they were expecting because now they needed it? And as soon as the market developed around those people, now nobody wants to buy a Peloton because all the people who were going to buy it bought it. Well, I'd say that Cisco's problem is the Peloton pull forward problem. Everybody who was going to buy Cisco switches to upgrade their gear bought them in December when they wanted to get it at a cheaper rate. Well, if I'm going to have to buy it anyway in the next year or so, might as well buy it while it's cheap, right? And so that means that quarter looked really good. And now the next quarter looks like crap because everybody who was going to buy that switch bought it already. And that's a problem. Not just because now your revenues look like crap. Remember what Chuck Robbins has been trying to do at Cisco for the last few years? It's been trying to turn them into a software company. Guess what? They're not there yet. So the question is, can he turn that aircraft carrier fast enough to keep it from sinking because of the hardware revenues being down? Because you can't solve the global chip shortage. That's not on you. That's on everybody else who makes chips. What you can do is you can try to diversify your product lines away from needing to ship more hardware. That's a harder problem to solve, and I don't know that Chuck's going to get it done soon. So this bad quarter makes Wall Street blanch, and for better or for worse, Wall Street seems to think that every year is 3 months long, and that's the only visibility that they have. In 6 months, this could change. It's going to be a radically different discussion because chip plants are going to come online. They're going to have more supply, whatever. Question is whether or not the investors are going to be willing to stick with him that long. And I don't know how that's going to work out. All right, Stephen, one of the largest data centers in the U.S. is going to have a new owner because DigitalBridge, which is a digital infrastructure investment firm, is buying the Las Vegas-based Switch for $34.25 a share, which, if you do the math, works out to be just around $11 billion. The transaction is going to take Switch private once again. Now, you're probably wondering to yourself, who exactly is DigitalBridge? Well, it turns out that they've been buying up data centers like Vantage and DataBank. So they seem to have a data center of data centers. Switch has expanded a lot of their offerings. We've toured the one in Las Vegas before, but we also know that they have locations located in garden spots like Reno, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Atlanta, Georgia. They're one of the largest data center providers in the world, and Rob Roy has definitely built quite an empire over there. Stephen, what is the final goal for DigitalBridge here by buying SuperNAP for such a huge price?
Yeah, well, let me just start by saying that Switch is probably the most interesting data center company in the world, and that's because it has some of the most interesting and innovative people in the world working for it. Starting with Rob Roy, as you mentioned, but extending, frankly, as far as I can tell, all the way down inside the company. One of the things that I love about Switch is not just is it impressive, but the company is committed to what's called ESG in terms of governance. In other words, they are focusing on good governance and sustainability and environmental awareness in terms of data center activities. It's one of the largest users of solar energy. They have really excellent approaches to power and cooling efficiency in their data centers. Effectively, Switch is kind of what we wish all data center companies were. The company went public back in 2017, but frankly, the stock has never really impressed. In fact, it dropped by more than two-thirds within a couple of years. And although it's been climbing back, it really hasn't gained all that much. This acquisition will kind of um, almost double the original IPO price, but that's not all that impressive for Wall Street types. What it is going to do, though, is it's going to bring this wonderfully innovative ESG focused company into a bigger world where it can make more of a difference. So, as you mentioned, Switch has these five purpose built data center campuses. The Las Vegas one is really impressive, as is the Citadel in Reno, the Pyramid in Grand Rapids, the Keep in Atlanta, and the Rock in Austin, which was acquired from Data Foundry. Um, and this company is going to bring all those ideas to the rest of Mark Ganzi's data centers, I believe. And I think that that's probably going to improve the overall efficiency of IT. So, this deal, which was announced May 11th, and we kind of overlooked here at the rundown, is really going to have more of an impact outside of Switch than inside. And I think that it's good for the industry overall. If you're someone who's on the fence about working in the field of security research because of the fear of prosecution, then you might like this news story. The US Department of Justice announced last week that they've changed their policy of bringing charges under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Now, if an individual or company is performing good faith security research, investigation, or correction of a security flaw, they will no longer be prosecuted under the CFAA. This policy change is meant to encourage others to help plug security holes and find flaws that could be exploited by foreign actors, while also making it harder for companies to file charges under the CFAA in an effort to avoid being embarrassed by third parties. The new DOJ policy takes place immediately. Tom, are we going to see a new rise in ethical hacking?
I think we should. And I know that there's a lot of people out there in the security research space that kind of have to be very, very careful about the way that they toe the line. Go back to Sneakers, one of my favorite movies of all time. That's essentially what this entails. You are paying people to break into your stuff. But when people pay you, like there's rules of engagement that are written down there. You're not allowed to attack these systems. You're not allowed to use these methods. And it kind of almost feels like you're tying the red team's hand behind their back in order to make sure that, either they're very narrowly focused on one thing that you're worried about, or you don't want to get embarrassed by the fact that, they call Eddie Vedder in accounting and get the password to the modem. Uh, and so what's happened is that there's a lot of companies out there who have kind of taken a risk on this by saying, well, I'm just going to go ahead and investigate some of the stuff that's going on. And oh, hey, I found a huge flaw. I'm going to notify you that you have a huge flaw, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to fix it before I disclose it. And then what the company does is threaten to sue the researcher because you violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act because you hacked my system without my permission. But I didn't do it to steal things. And so that's where the disconnect has been. I'm trying to do things in good faith, and tell you how to fix them. Maybe I'm trying to claim a bug bounty. I mean, I know there are people who make a lot of money off of that, but maybe I'm just trying to do it because I want to protect you and you're going to sue me for it. So what the Department of Justice is effectively saying is we're not going to do that anymore. If you can prove that you were doing good faith security research, we're not going to press charges because that's what people should be doing. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, isn't that going to cause a lot more hacking? Yeah, it is. For good faith, which means you're not stealing things, which means you're not dropping Trojans on people's machines, which means you're not trying to gain a foothold. Oh, like the foreign hackers that are doing those things. Any one of the Bear Crews, Lazarus, any of the APT groups operating out of China. The ones who want to hack you and they're not going to be nice about it. They're not going to write a fun little report and give you the notification that you got a 9.8 severity alert. No, they're just going to get into your system and steal all your secrets and then use that as a foothold to infect other systems. So I think this is a change that's been a long time coming, and it kind of follows policy changes in the Department of Justice of we're not going to prosecute things that probably should never have been prosecuted in the first place. And when you consider that the CFAA was passed in the 80s in response to War Games, the movie with a young Matthew Broderick, that should tell you how closely we need to look at this law and redefine it so that we don't have to have these memorandums from the Department of Justice saying, yeah, I know technically we're supposed to sue you if you hack things, but we're not going to. By the way, for those of you out there, this is a reminder that good faith security hacking doesn't mean sharing your Netflix password with your friends. So you're probably still going to get in trouble for that. All right, Stephen, after announcing the new C7G instances based on their in-house Graviton 3 chips at AWS reInvent last year, Amazon has finally put these suckers into production. Graviton 3 is an unusual design because it's a monolithic CPU die, but it has chiplet-based support elements. Stranger still, they're on a 3-socket motherboard. Stephen, what exactly is the attraction of Graviton 3?
Well, Tom, the attraction of Graviton 3 is that we have a server class CPU that is actually really looking good compared to what some of the next generation CPUs from the big guys are, and is delivering the goods in Amazon AWS. So let me give you a little bit of background here. So as you might have heard, Amazon AWS has an internal group called Annapurna Labs, which develops their own hardware, including the famous Nitro DPU, which is what kind of kicked off the whole DPU mania that we're seeing in enterprise, along with the Graviton CPUs, the Trainium AI training cores, which was really kind of a letdown on code names. Sorry, guys. And the Inferentia inference engines. The Graviton was originally basically just a scaled up Nitro, but the Graviton 2, which came in 2019, really, I think, set the world on notice, because here we had a high-performance 64-core ARM-based CPU in the cloud that used the Neoverse N1 cores from ARM. So basically, it offered really good performance, 64 cores, low price, low energy consumption. Those things were pretty popular. Well, Graviton 3 is really kind of an update to that, but with a lot of extras. So let's start with the chip itself. So it may not look like much because we've still got 64 cores, but these are Zeus V1 cores, which are much more powerful. But importantly, this is point number one about next generation CPU architecture. Importantly, they include accelerators for floating point and machine learning, which is really what we're seeing as a differentiator across the board in next generation CPUs. The next thing that's interesting about this is a chiplet-based design, which may ring a bell if you've been following AMD and Intel and Apple, for that matter, in terms of chip design. Interestingly, though, what AWS decided to do here is the CPU core itself is actually a single chip, not just a chiplet. It's the supporting elements around it that are chiplets. In other words, unlike what Apple did with the M1 Ultra or what AMD and Intel look to be doing, which has kind of a core or a few cores on a chiplet, and then they marry those together to make many cores. Now we got 64 cores on one chiplet, and then it's the surrounding chips that are separate chiplets. And what this means is that Apple, Sorry, AWS. Man, we got a lot of A's in here. They can upgrade this chip if they want with new supporting chiplets. So if they want to include better I/O, or maybe some kind of a storage processor or something like that, maybe even bring the Nitro on board, they can do that without having to rev the basic CPU, which is kind of cool. Um, as you mentioned, one of the weirdest things about this thing is that they're being rolled out with a 3-socket motherboard. That's just strange, because usually you'll see 1 socket, 2 socket, 4 socket, sometimes more socket, but 3 socket is something that we haven't really seen a lot of. Well, the reason they're doing that is because it's actually not a 3 socket motherboard. It's actually 3 systems on a motherboard. Each of these boards uses one of AWS's Nitro DPUs to coordinate external I/O between these 3 basically autonomous systems. So instead of being a 3 socket motherboard, imagine this as a 3 node motherboard with a Nitro managing I/O. And then it becomes clear what they're doing here. It's all about increased density, increased efficiency, and frankly, giving access to all this power to AWS customers. So the bottom line here is that Gravitron 3 may not look as much of an upgrade from 2 as you might think, but it really, really is, especially where it matters, which is in the use case and the pocketbooks of Amazon AWS customers.
All right, Stephen. Well, let's jump into a couple of stories that came out this week that require a little bit more analysis. The first of these was probably the biggest shock to the virtualization community that we've seen in a lot of months. Because over the weekend, the press noted that chip giant Broadcom is in talks to purchase VMware. Yes, that's right. The former stepchild of Dell and EMC was spun off less than a year ago, back in September, into its own separate company that Michael Dell and Silver Lake still own pretty big parts of. But the news mentioned that Broadcom has been looking to expand their software portfolio, and that would mean that VMware would join CA and Symantec in the Broadcom suite. The reported valuation of VMware is north of $40 billion, which could put the acquisition price as high as $60 billion, which Broadcom has the money to do, but there are a lot of problems with that. Mostly the community reaction. It was largely negative. And when I say largely, I mean like 95%. Many analysts are weighing in on this, and I believe that I heard things like disaster, dumpster fire, horrible decision. So I'd say the analyst community is pretty united in their viewpoint that this isn't a good thing. Stephen, what's your stance on this?
Well, this is pretty weird story, honestly. Most of you listening to this are going to be like, wait, Broadcom? Don't they make some kind of like, I don't know, like chips or something? No. Broadcom isn't that company and hasn't been that company for a while. They have acquired other software companies, including CA and Symantec Security, in the last few years. And this has made Broadcom into more of an integrated IT company than anything. But if you think about those 2 companies, what do they do and what's their place in IT infrastructure? Honestly, Broadcom's real focus is in buying mature companies that will generate revenue for a while at a very high rate. In other words, it's not quite a retirement home for companies, but it's certainly not a dynamic developer of technology. If VMware goes to Broadcom, essentially we're going to see a switch in VMware from an innovative product company that's trying to compete in the latest and greatest trends in data center and cloud to becoming a company that's like CA, trying to make money from the enterprise, which from an investor standpoint is great. From a nerd standpoint, not so great. The other question here, I think, though, is why Broadcom and why not, literally anyone else in the IT industry? And I think that's actually a very valid point. Certainly, Broadcom has the money and the interest to buy this thing, but wouldn't it be better with, I don't know, almost anyone else in the industry? Some of the usual suspects that have been suggested would include, well, Dell would have been on the list, but I guess that's not going to happen. HPE, that's not probably going to happen either. But what about Microsoft? What about NVIDIA? What about Intel? What about AMD? What about almost anyone else in the industry? Or what about, how about we don't buy VMware and we let the company actually grow and prosper on its own instead of snapping it up just as soon as it becomes independent of Dell? I think those are all real good points. Basically, I'm just scratching my head and kind of hoping that this doesn't happen because I like VMware. I like the direction they're taking. I like the products. And I really don't want to see this acquisition happen. How about anybody else?
Well, I mean, that's just crazy talk, Stephen. I mean, why would we let a perfectly good company continue to do what a perfectly good company does, which is make money for their shareholders, when we can own it instead and run it into the ground? Yeah, my take on this is very similar to yours, and I think honestly that this is a lot like IBM, where yeah, and disclaimer, old IBMer, and I worked for Tom Watson's IBM before it became what it is now, which is some kind of weird Kyndryl thing, Red Hat BM. Essentially, IBM makes money off of mainframes. Like that's their bread and butter, right? They are effectively, I believe that the financial term is like a rents company. Like they are basically paying the bills with their one technology. And VMware's not there yet. They are definitely trying to make themselves an important part of the cloud by essentially becoming the hybrid cloud company, right? Oh, hey, you can run VMs or you can run Kubernetes on premises or in the cloud. Hybrid model will help you fix that, right? Yeah, no big deal. Except the problem is that that's a hard enough row to hoe when you're on your own and you're good at it. When you suddenly have Broadcom sitting on top of you making these decisions, yeah, I mean, that's not going to be easy. That's the reason why they spun out in the first place, is because by being a neutral third party, they have the ability to go to the on-premises data center people and sell their wares and try to, kind of sideload with Amazon and with Azure. And Amazon or Microsoft buying them would actually be a terrible idea because of that, because then you're kind of locked into whatever they're going to offer you. But I think importantly, Broadcom just wants to make a splash. Like they just want to say, hey, look, we spent a whole bunch of money and look at this cool software company that we own now. And in 7 months, nobody's going to care. Like that, it's just going to kind of disappear into thin air, because when's the last time you heard Symantec in the news? Yeah, that's right. Other than this, I probably you haven't for a while. In fact, I had forgotten that they'd even bought CA. And remember how CA used to be? Yeah, that should tell you if CA's out of the news for not screwing up companies and Broadcom is because they own CA, that should give you a lot of fair warning. I'm not going to say that this is going to fall apart, because we've even heard that the possibility exists that they could be talking about this tomorrow as of this recording. I think what's going to happen is the same thing that happened when Broadcom tried to buy Qualcomm. The regulators are going to step in and go, I don't think this is a good idea. And we're going to kind of see that go poof. Speaking of regulators, Stephen, there was another interesting story that I wanted to get your take on because it's kind of fun. So, most everybody who listens to the rundown knows that if you're a Western company that's operating in China, you actually aren't allowed to do that unless you are basically a joint venture with a local Chinese company, right? Because that's how Chinese regulations are. Now, ARM is no different because they are actually operating in China as an entity called China ARM. Okay. Well, last week it was announced that a mysterious company called LotCap Group signed a letter of intent to buy a 51% stake in ARM China. That's weird. Here's what's making it even weirder. This comes after reports that ARM China CEO Alan Wu has refused to step down after the board implemented a plan to replace him with two co-CEOs. SoftBank, remember those guys? They own 49% of ARM China. So they own the minority stake of that joint venture. They've been trying to distance themselves from Mr. Wu for quite a while, because you know what they want to do? Take ARM public. Why would they want to do that? Oh, yeah, that's right. That whole acquisition thing that happened last year between NVIDIA and ARM that didn't pan out. So essentially, Stephen, what we've got is a mysterious company buying a majority stake to possibly get rid of a CEO that doesn't want to leave, so that a company that owns a minority stake of a different company can take that company public to maybe pay off some of the stuff that the other company is doing. And if this sounds like an episode of Dynasty, you're not the only one thinking that. Stephen, what's going on here?
I have no idea. Why are you asking me? No, the truth is that nobody has any idea what's going on here. I mean, this plot thickens. Like you said, ARM was forced to basically create this joint venture in order to continue to operate in China. The ARM owns 49%, and different Chinese entities own the 51%. As you said, they've been trying to get rid of the CEO. And it's funny, as late as April 30th, it was reported that the CEO was out, that Wu was no longer CEO of ARM China. But I don't think he got the memo. And it certainly seems like whoever LotCap are uh, didn't get the memo, or maybe they did. I just don't know what to make of this. I mean, the whole thing is so strange. It's so opaque. We have no idea who these people are, who's behind this purchase, whether this is really an offer or whether this is some sort of hardball stock manipulation game that's being played in the Chinese stock market. We don't know if this is related to SoftBank's ownership of ARM and the collapse of the NVIDIA deal, or some effort, as you said, to raise money from SoftBank to go public with ARM. We don't know anything. Now, it is interesting, though, if you follow the dotted lines here, that SoftBank did want to get rid of the CEO and management of ARM China. This would effectively do that. SoftBank does want to float ARM as a public company. This would give them the money to make that happen. And the opaque ownership of whoever LotCap is means that there could indeed be some sort of connection there between them and SoftBank. So this could be related to that, or that could be completely off base, and I have no idea what I'm talking about, because that would be just as likely. So basically, my answer here, Tom, is the famous, and we'll see what happens. Certainly going to be watching.
Oh, Stephen, being neutral and politically correct about all of this, I'm just going to go out there and say it. This is a direct result of what happened with the failed ARM acquisition. SoftBank is mad and they're losing money. And I think that what happened was reading the tea leaves, because let's be fair, you and I talked about this ad nauseum for a long time. And what was the thing that we were the most worried about? It wasn't the British regulators coming down, it was the Chinese regulators. We knew that even if the British regulators said that this was going to go through, the Chinese regulators were not going to let it happen. Period. We are not going to let an American company buy something that we consider to be critical to the national infrastructure of China. And so by effectively kind of tipping their hand early, that allowed the British regulators to kind of step up and, I'm terribly troubled by what this could be, which is British for, oh my God, freak out. So they didn't have to show their hand. But I think SoftBank remembers, just like the North remembers. SoftBank remembers. And so what happened was they decided that they needed to get rid of the CEO because they knew there was no plan that they could do that would allow them to make money off of their investment that would go through if the current CEO and his group were there. So they tried to remove them, and it didn't work because he didn't want to go. And we've seen that in other political areas in China recently, where forces have caused someone to want to step down and they didn't. And in other cases, that has been a little bit more overt to make them leave. And so I think that this is kind of a shadow hand move to basically say, leave or we're going to make you leave. Financially speaking, we're going to buy out the company. We're going to kick you out. We're going to replace the whole board. And then we're going to let SoftBank make money off of this. So I would not be shocked to see if maybe Alan Wu exits if this venture ends up either falling apart or is revealed to actually be capitalized by SoftBank somehow, so that at the very minimum, they can take the Western part of ARM public so that they can recoup some of that investment and potentially package it up and sell it off. I don't know that this is going to end up working the way that they think, because what we could actually see is this Chinese owned venture deciding that they don't want anything to do with a potential IPO and kind of reaving the company in half and causing the Chinese version of it to kind of become insular and doing their own development and basically creating a Chinese version of the ARM chip, which would suit the Chinese government just fine. I don't think they'd cry one bit. I don't know. I hope it's not nefarious. I hope I'm not like, tilting at windmills and trying to see conspiracy theories where they're not. But man, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it sounds an awful lot like a hostile takeover to me. All right, well, enough prognosticating about geopolitical stuff. Let's talk about some exciting things that are coming up in the week ahead. Actually, it's not next week, but in a couple of weeks, June 12th through the 16th is Cisco Live. That'll be taking place in Las Vegas, Nevada, and we're going to be there. We're going to be having Tech Field Day at the event. The 14th and 15th of June, we have presentations from Cisco, Open Gear, and IP Fabric. You're definitely going to want to tune in. Check the website, techfieldday.com, to find out more information about that. Stephen, what have you got coming up after that?
Well, I am pretty excited to have Cloud Field Day return June 22nd through 24th, Wednesday through Friday. We've got a lot of great companies, a lot of folks flying in from around the world and joining us remotely for that event. So please do tune in. Also, I'm going to make a quick pitch here. We have posted all the videos from AI Field Day. So if you're interested in the AI space, check out the Tech Field Day on YouTube for those videos.
Absolutely. And if you want to see anything that we've been working on, or any of the upcoming things that we have, like we said, go to techfieldday.com, check it out. Also, up at the top of that page, there's a little yellow box that has our newsletter. Sign up for that, and we'll send you information about upcoming field day events to figure out, if something is more your speed and networking or mobility or storage or security. We'll let you know when those events are happening, because that's what we like to do. We like to keep you up to date on all the things that are important, which is why we have the rundown every Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern Time. If you have any news stories that you'd like to suggest for us, please make sure you tweet at GestaltIT. Use the use the hashtag rundown, because that will let us check it out. Because sometimes in our busy schedules, we might miss that a data center is being acquired, or that a shadow organization is trying to buy out majority controlling stake of a company. But we want to make sure that we cover those, because that's what this is about. It's about enterprise news, and it's about making sure that you have everything you need to do in order to make sure that you have a great day. So for Tom Hollingsworth and for Stephen Foskett, thank you very much for tuning in for the rundown. We'll be back next week with more great stories. But until then, enjoy your time. And if you're in the U.S., enjoy a slightly longer holiday with Memorial Day coming up. And we'll see you all soon.